If it goes wrong, if it goes wrong.
Greetings. Welcome to Uncommon Voices Unbound, the podcast where we explore the ideas, movements, and moral questions shaping our world. I'm Reverend Dr. Tony Bond. On this episode, I was joined by two distinguished activist scholars, Reverend Dr. Iva Carruthers and the Right Reverend Dr. Edward Donalson III, for a dynamic and thought-provoking conversation about Christian nationalism. Together, we explored its historical roots, theological claims, political implications, and its impact on democracy, religious freedom, and reproductive and sexual justice. What is it? Where did it come from? And how does it differ from personal faith? What are its ties to white dominion and xenophobia? And how is it shaping conversations about democracy, religious freedom, race, gender, bodily autonomy, and reproductive and sexual justice? Through the lenses of history, theology, ethics, and justice, we explored how religious beliefs can sometimes become political power misused. We also discussed whose voices are amplified or silenced, and what is at stake for communities seeking dignity, agency, and human flourishing. Join us as we unbind the narratives, assumptions, and structures behind this complex topic and consider what is at stake for faith communities, civic life, and our collective futures. So I am really excited to have this conversation with you, Bishop Donaldson and Dr. Iva, about not just the rise of Christian nationalism in this current political moment, because it's not just this current political moment. Christian nationalism has been prevalent well before this current political moment with the second Trump administration. But there's something very different, it seems, it feels like, about this current political moment. That the way in which the conservatives, the white nationalists, are attempting to ground their policies, their pieces of legislation that they're attempting to pass in Christian nationalism, and associating Christianity with whiteness and whiteness with Christianity. And that feels different. And maybe what feels different is that it feels more escalated in some way. But I think first we should talk about what is Christian nationalism. And I'd love to hear how you all think about or define Christian nationalism. Either way, go first. Dr. Carruthers.
Well, I think language is very, very important, particularly at this time. And with that, I think it's a misnomer to even perpetuate the assumption that it is Christian.
Mm.
And that part of what we need to do is to deconstruct that in a way where we are making a statement about our understanding of what Christianity is and is not. That's one. And two, I think it is no more than a redefinition of a manifest destiny kind of spirit, which justifies a divine authority to oppress those who are uncommon voices.
Right.
And that's why your podcast is so important to us all, as is this conversation. Having said that, then, I think that Christian nationalism, as it is in this moment, represents the dominion theology that allows for whiteness and those who are feeling particularly demographically challenged in ways that they did not feel at the founding of this country to act out of a sense of desperation.
I appreciate your emphasis on language is important, and to say that there's nothing Christian about this, that in fact we have to call it what it is: white supremacy, white nationalism, but it's certainly not Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think to add on to what Dr. Carruthers has laid for us as a foundation, the reason you're talking about the feeling is different because this iteration of white Christian national, or really white Christo nationalism, not Christian nationalism, but this particular iteration has a perverse reverse victimization mentality that underlies it, such that heretofore other iterations have always said we are the dominant narrative. In this case, this Christian nationalism that we see, Christian nationalism that we see, centers the idea that Christians are here under persecution and that they are the minoritized voice that must be protected and lifted. And that's a very different term for what has always been a Christocentric kind of Judeo-Christian, if one subscribes to the possibility of Judeo-Christian. But that's part and parcel of who's been in power. But the idea that they had somehow lost power and need to regain power comes with a particular brand of cruelty and a particular justification for the cruelty. Not that it hasn't been cruelty stitched all through, right? But this particular iteration has an underlying cruelty that comes from this idea that we now have to get revenge for what's been taken from us.
The other element that I find so very interesting about this Christo nationalism, as you have called it, is how they are also associating it with patriotism, right? That, and this claim now that they're trying to put forth that the United States is a Christian country. And even going so far as to say that the white men who founded this country, stole this country, identified as Christian. And that isn't true. Not all of them identified or claimed Christian religion. But even as they talk about, the current administration talks about celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States. If you go to their website, they have a whole section tying religion, Christianity, to the 250th anniversary of the United States. So, what's your thoughts about how they are also trying to tie this Christo religion to patriotism? Because a lot of people, many people are saying, we're losing democracy. We're watching democracy die. I maintain that certain populations have never been able to realize true democracy in this country. And that democracy, as we know of it, was never constructed to benefit Black and brown people. And neither were the tools by which white people have used to maintain democracy, those tools were never meant to be used by Black people. I mean, we have been able to use the court systems and the legislative process, but those tools were never designed to truly benefit Black and brown people. So, what do you think about how they are trying to link even patriotism with religion, or specifically their version of Christianity?
Well, I think that nationalism implies a geopolitical understanding of land.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, they came as colonizers to steal the land and claim divine manifest destiny from one coast to the other as a part of their inherent divine right and authority. And so the notion of patriotism becomes a natural way to solidify those that they are representing, a bond that would culturally create the unity they need for a winning agenda for such a time as this. And so I'm not at all surprised. And Dr. Tony, you'll remember that you were one of the first ones to bring to our attention the Blitz document as foundational to Project 2025. And it was that Blitz document which really gave voice to their understanding that they had to take over the cultural control of the narrative in relationship to patriotism, and thus make sure that from public schools to libraries to city halls, there was this notion of patriotism connected to Christianity that was going to drive this unified notion of whiteness and white dominion. So I don't think, to your point, we should be surprised at all about them using the language of patriotism to fulfill their agenda around creating a nationalistic understanding of what it means to be white in a changing world order. And I think one of the things we really need to think very, very deeply about, and I think this is the point that you were making about this different moment, is that we're in an age in which the whole notion of defining humanity and what that means is before us just by the technological tools that they have in their hands. And so at the end of the day, we need to really look at what is the spirit of the people who control the technologies that ultimately control the notion of a democracy. And not forget that it was over 50 years ago, I think, that P.F. Skinner said, democracy is over. And he redacted his work and said, we must move to a genetic meritocracy. Genetic meritocracy is what he named as the next phase of American nationalism / democracy / Christian nationalism.
Can you say a little more about exactly what is a genetic meritocracy?
Well, interestingly enough, when he said that, we were on the cusp of exploration of the human genome. Mrs. Latz, talking about reproductive justice, her DNA became a significant, as we know, the most significant gift to this science, right? But it was grounded in a notion that our old language of democracy was based on numeric, quantitative data, where we would be the majority. And now that we see the demographic shift in which we are becoming less of a majority and, in fact, a minority of people who are diverse enough, brown and Black, that it's going to statistically diminish our capacity to maintain power if it's one person, one vote. And therefore, we've got to create a very sophisticated hierarchical system of a meritocracy, which says some people are more valuable than others. And so we create this triage of a hierarchy of human value, which essentially says that genetics should inform who has value versus who doesn't. And thus, B.F. Skinner called it a genetic meritocracy. So it would be defined by genetics / and merit. Quote, unquote.
Dr. Carruthers, can we then talk about what we're really seeing in this moment is a full manifestation of epigenetic coding?
Yes.
Because what we're dealing with is post-enslavers traumatic syndrome. As much as we talked about post-traumatic slave disorder, but we never talk about what is in the genetics of the enslaver. And part of what's in the genetics, to your question earlier, is the ability to make religion porous, such that we will tie what we call Christianity to whatever the cause of the day is. Go back to the enslaver Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson creates his own Bible, the Jeffersonian Bible. Takes out all of the miracle, takes out all of the mysticism, and then hands people this and says, this is a Bible. And this, in fact, is the correct Bible. You take the enslavers and the way that they created a slave Bible and manipulated the text such that all narratives of exodus and freedom and God being on the side of those who find themselves with their backs perpetually against the wall, all of that is stripped from the Bible. Even the baptism code that enslaved folks were given, the baptismal formula, had them to agree to heavenly salvation without any earthly redemption. Now you fast forward to a Trumpian era, and what you see is the same tactics of enslavement being used to take the Bible, whether it be upside down or quoted from 2 Corinthians, but to tie it to the advancement of white supremacy. The Bible has for them always been in service of power and domination to hold their supremacist narrative intact, whatever that narrative has looked like along the way. So they're tying Christianity to any form of oppression is normative in their genetics. And I think what we see in tying this patriotism is just another way of circling back to what Dr. Carruthers is so brilliantly explained to us, a new hierarchy, a new way to keep their power intact.
So, Bishop, I think the operative word you used was religion.
Right.
And religious.
Yes.
And I think that part of what we are positioned to do is to understand that that is cultural and institutional versus spirituality.
That's right.
And it is the ways in which I think people of African descent express their spirituality as both related to justice and righteousness that distinguishes us from those who would create this narrow understanding of institutional religion as a dogmatic way of expressing who is human and who is not, or who is in and who is not, who is worthy and who is not.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Were you going to respond to that, Bishop?
Well, not only that, I think the difference is the motive for what it means to be in relationship to the divine. That African cosmologies don't seek relationship with the divine as access to power over, but rather power of. What does the divine empower us to do? Right, that is African cosmology
in the context of community,
not
yes, individuality.
Yes, and theirs is, how do we use? It's very utilitarian. How do we use the divine to justify being powerful over? And it's a different way of thinking, and I think you're sagacious to call that forward for us, because part of what has trapped us in a vicious cycle of white supremacy is our inability and our unwillingness as a nation, not as a Black people, but as a nation, to grapple with what we are really saying. What are we identifying? And how do we use words as concepts to empower? And I think that's very important.
And just as a footnote, thus, as a trained sociologist, I have to catch myself and I resist white supremacy and choose white dominion. Because supremacy reinforces
Yes.
every time we use it that veracity that they are supreme.
That they are
when in
supreme.
fact it is dominion. That they are dominion over the environment, to dominion over who is who and who is human and who has the right.
And that's why they use the text.
Mhm.
Let us have
Yes,
dominion. It is the
yes,
dominion mandate.
yes.
Yes, that's very
Yeah.
good. The New Apostolic Reformation
Mhm.
and the dominion mandate over the seven mountains.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Because but the scripture there is not about dominion. It's
Mhm.
really about stewardship.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And we
Stewardship.
understand
Right.
that.
And that's spiritual. That's
Right.
spiritual.
Yes.
Stewardship.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. That humans were not placed on this planet to have power over, dominion over,
Right.
but to care for,
Right.
stewardship,
And to live with.
to live with,
live with.
right,
In responsibility.
Right.
right,
Exactly.
In service.
Yes.
in service.
Accountability.
two.
All of those.
Yes.
Service too.
Yes. What role do events like the January 6th act of domestic terrorism, and even this, I don't know if either of you all saw the memorial that they did to Charlie Kirk and Turning Point, but I watched it. I'm glad I did, because it was a sight to behold. Talk about how the narrative became one of white dominion. And so much so, and as you just said, tying it to scripture, that not only are they do they have power over, but it's been ordained by God. And very violently references to holy wars,
Right.
that they have been empowered by God with the sword to slay, right? And this is the language they use, to slay their enemies. And
Because
that
they are the chosen.
right, and that the entire Trump administration, the entire cabinet, has been ordained by God. How did we get here?
I blame the Calvinists. I blame the Puritans and in that if you can hold simultaneously total depravity of man and election, that I am the very elect of God, and God knows I'm totally depraved, you can justify acts of violence and tyranny and oppression and dominion because God is on my side. And God has also created me with
All my flaws, all my depravedness,
and in all of that,
yes,
I am the chosen.
I am still the chosen one.
Which is why they could have Sunday morning worship experiences, or what they called worship experiences, and walk out of the front doors of the church and lynch someone as a part of their community church activities of the day. Right?
And have their children watch. And
Celebrate, chopping off parts of our bodies to send across the country as souvenirs that they had attended. This is partial of the lynching. So when you see Michael Brown laying in the street for hours, and the digital observation of that, that's public lynching. But it goes all the way back to this idea that I am both totally depraved and fully the elect of God, and I have no contradiction in those polarities. That's where I start the conversation.
what makes the people willingly follow and accept that ideology?
That's the sociologist.
I'm asking the sociologist, Dr. Carruthers, help me understand what makes people.
Well, some of these questions is what drove me to seminary. And, I think there may be two concepts I've been struggling with. One is what I call IDDS, identity delusion and denial syndrome. And I think we're all infected with it. And what that essentially means is that we're in denial about our reality. And we're delusional about, quote, our supremacy. And the result of that has infected the world and our consciousness beyond not being conscious, but to this consciousness. And what I mean by that is that we're all victims of white dominion. And we have internalized our identity delusion and denial in different ways. People of color have self-negated themselves because we are delusional and in denial as well. But they certainly are, as they put forth their agenda of dominion. But the other thing, Bishop, I think you spoke about is this notion of epigenetics. Yes. And we may not know all the answers, but we do know there are real valid questions about the implications of how you hold pain, trauma, woundedness, delusion, and denial as psychosocial that is informed by your theology and vice versa. So I don't know what we do with that. But I know that reproductive justice is a part of that conversation.
I agree. But I want to go back to something I've been sitting with ever since the race between Jasmine Crockett and James Tallarico. Because even listening to Tallarico bring in religion made me nervous. And I've been sitting with, I've been to seminary, I've been ethicist,
Right.
and everything he said sounds fine.
Right.
But it still makes me nervous.
It ought to make us all nervous.
It makes me very nervous. And I haven't quite fully defined why it makes me nervous, but it makes me very nervous. Because in some respects, it feels like, well, you're kind of no different from the folks who are deeply wedded and immersed in Christian nationalism. You're just saying the other side. And that, for me, is not representative. Even how he has brought religion into his platform, for me, does not speak to true Christianity. It just doesn't. And I'm still trying to grapple with, well, what about that makes you so uncomfortable?
He's saying,
yes, okay,
right, and I think we've been reiterating, what do you mean when you say? And because he's a politician, I can't trust what you mean.
Yeah.
Even if you're singing my same song, it doesn't mean we have the same tune.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But he was able, just like this current administration, to sway the voters, the majority of the voters, to vote for him.
And I think that gets back to this identity question.
Okay.
Identity that is related to whiteness.
Yes.
And therefore, the pivotal influence of the Hispanic vote, quote unquote, many of whom are infected and conflicted by identity delusion and denial, who view themselves as white, will vote against their self-interest. And that has been the case all along.
It's the cruel optimism of whiteness.
Yes.
Because whiteness changes over time. It
Mhm.
always has.
Mhm.
And so there are multiple groups waiting in
That's
line,
right.
not to critique it, not to dismantle it, but actually to participate
That's
in it.
right.
And some of those groups are Black people.
That's right. Because we want to be honorary white people.
That's absolutely correct.
And you go to Ghana today and you see these major commercial signages on the highways for bleaching cream.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
so.
Well, I saw that in South Africa years
yes,
ago when I was at the
absolutely.
UN World Conference on Racism.
Yeah.
Thus far, we've been having this conversation at somewhat of a kind of academic level. But how do we begin to have this conversation in ways that create teachable moments for people, for our folks in the Black community, our friends, our family members, our church members, to begin to interrogate these questions?
I will offer that we are doing that. I think we're not listening across the table.
And I would ditto that.
Yeah. I think grandma and them have always been doing that.
They had the answer.
They had the answers and they had the theologic underneath it. Now, the theologians were talking at an academic level, but grandma's theologic was much more powerful, right? And it looked like, don't say that, baby. That's what they told you.
Right. But that was then, but I'm talking about now. How do we do that?
You don't think we're still doing it?
Well, I think what we have to first do is stop having conversations in silos.
Yeah.
And so what's missing is setting a table
Yes.
where we can come together and not recreate that hierarchy.
Mhm.
Where grandma's point of view, let's really adopt this Sankofa
Right.
methodology and understand wisdom is in the bosom of grandma.
Dr.
And the
Iva,
sacred memory of our people who have the answers.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That is what's missing, the table.
Yes.
We don't have, the table hasn't been set,
Right.
right? Because you go to grandma's house,
That's
I
right.
remember going to grandma's house
Yes.
for dinner,
Yeah.
and the table was
It's
set,
set.
That's right.
right?
Judiciously set.
Right, it was set. And so
Mhm.
we don't have, the table hasn't, well, we haven't identified the table, and then the table hasn't been set.
And there's so many questions about the creation of a table that I think we do have to interrogate.
Yeah.
Who gets to do the invitations?
Yeah.
Who gets to receive an invitation?
That's true.
Who, what Fred Hampton, white power to white people, yellow power to yellow people, brown power to brown people, Black power to Black people, X power to all the people we forgot, we left out. And I think as we talk about this table, I think it will have to be created in partnership with grandma, not for grandma, but it'll have to be, there's got to be a way where we come together and grandma is equally in the creation of the table such that she is not spectacle.
Right.
Yeah, but that her voice is actually centered. But you're never centered when you're there by invitation. You're centered because you're part of the creation.
This has been, we could talk, I think the three of us, this conversation could go on.
Oh, certainly.
But thank you for having this conversation and sharing your thoughts about this important topic in this current political moment. And I hope that we can have part 2, because it feels like we have to pick up on what does it mean to create the table now.
Yeah.
I want to thank both Drs. Carruthers and Donalson for sharing their intellectually stimulating and profound reflections about Christian nationalism. There's so much more we can discuss on this important topic. Look forward to part 2 of this discussion in the near future. Stay uncommon, stay unbound, and we'll meet you where truth breaks loose, disrupts gently, and transforms boldly. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on our videos, and let us know what topics you'd like to discuss in the future.